What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Wrestling Decoded. And today we're looking at something wrestling rarely does, honestly, a full, unflinching account of a major star's behavior that sits alongside his undeniable in-ring greatness rather than replacing it. Randy Orton is a 14-time world champion, one of the most technically gifted performers WWE has ever produced, a legitimate case for the greatest pure villain in wrestling history. He's also someone whose early career is documented in ways most major stars quietly avoid. Through receipts, through interviews from people who were actually there, and in one case, through an official WWE DVD release that acknowledged his own reputation directly. So today, we're putting both sides of this story in the same room and letting the full picture speak for itself. Let's get into it. If you're into these honest, fully documented deep dives on wrestling's most complex figures, that's exactly what this channel does. Go ahead and subscribe before we start. The foundation of Randy Orton's story is genuinely unique in modern wrestling because his path to the top was faster than almost anyone else in WWE history, and that speed created problems before he ever had the tools to handle them. He's the son of Cowboy Bob Orton and the grandson of Bob Orton Sr., a third-generation wrestler who debuted on the WWE main roster in 2002 and was immediately pushed with the kind of investment the company reserves for people it's already decided are going to matter. Even when he suffered an early career injury, WWE kept him on television rather than letting him disappear, a clear signal of how much stock they'd placed in him. By 2004, at just 24 years old, he defeated Chris Benoit to become the youngest world heavyweight champion in WWE history, a distinction that, as has since been noted by multiple observers, was partly designed to take that record away from the recently departed Brock Lesnar, rather than purely as a show of faith in Orton himself. The backstage behavior that defined his early years began almost as soon as he got that kind of push behind him. His rapid rise was marred by immaturity, and early in his career he was labeled a problem child. What's remarkable about the documented record of this period is how consistent it is across completely independent sources. People who had no reason to coordinate their accounts and who came forward years apart all describe the same general pattern of behavior. On the Evolution of a Predator DVD set, the documentary goes into detail of how Orton was perceived during his time at Ohio Valley Wrestling. John Cena, a squeaky clean company man, said on the DVD that his first impression of Orton was that he was a real problem. When WWE puts that kind of candid assessment about one of their own performers in an official release, it tends to carry more weight than anything a third party says. There were several reports of Orton disrespecting other female wrestlers. One time he harassed Amy Weber after she took some ibuprofen from the men's locker room. In a separate, more serious incident, Orton engaged in dangerous behavior by setting off fireworks at fellow wrestlers sitting in a car, causing one female wrestler to describe it as one of the scariest moments of her life. Maria Kanellis, who spoke about this directly in an interview with Sean Oliver on Kayfabe Commentaries, described it in terms that made clear it wasn't a prank that accidentally went wrong. It was a deliberate, genuinely dangerous act that happened because Orton thought it was funny. That interview sits alongside multiple other accounts from women who worked in WWE during that era and describe similar experiences of boundary violations and disrespect from the same person. Here's a question worth sitting with. How does a performer with this documented backstage record not only survive in WWE, but continue getting pushed to the very top of the company for years through all of it? The answer that keeps coming up across the timeline is a simple one. WWE genuinely believed he was irreplaceable as an on-screen performer, and that belief consistently outweighed the consequences of his behavior. There were reports at one point that several WWE officials lobbied to get him fired because he had become a thorn in their side. And yet he wasn't. The company suspended him multiple times across his career, twice under the WWE wellness policy for substance violations in 2006 and 2012, but never terminated his contract despite pressure from within the organization to do so. The Ken Anderson situation is one of the more consequential examples of how Orton's backstage influence actually operated. Anderson's abrupt firing from WWE came shortly after a match during which he suplexed the injury-prone Orton awkwardly. Despite the match marking Anderson's return to action for the first time in months following injury, he was subsequently released following what he believed was backstage lobbying on the part of John Cena and Orton, both of whom reportedly called Anderson dangerous in the ring. Whether that account is fully accurate is difficult to verify independently, but the pattern it suggests, Orton having real influence over who stayed and who went, lines up with other documented situations from the same period. Quick pause here. Drop a comment on whether you think a performer should face more consequences than Orton faced during this period, or whether results on television genuinely should outweigh backstage behavior and how a company makes its decisions. The vandalism incidents in Europe in 2006 are perhaps the most widely documented of the early career controversies, and they're significant partly because of what happened as a result. Chris Nowinski, a neuroscientist and former wrestler, linked Orton's infamous 2006 anger issues, including vandalism and hostility, to the psychological strain of WWE's schedule, arguing that wrestlers like Orton often adopt aggressive personas as a coping mechanism, blurring the line between character and reality. That's an interesting frame, and one worth taking seriously given what we know about the physical and mental toll of wrestling's travel demands. It doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does add context that pure outrage tends to strip away. The on-screen story that carried the most real-life weight, almost uncomfortably so, was his 2020 feud with Edge. His 2020 feud with Edge, a storyline rooted in real-life betrayal, forced audiences to reckon with his past. Both men have addressed the real history between them in various interviews since, and the fact that WWE built a major television storyline around their genuine complicated relationship says something about how the company has always operated, using real emotion as fuel for scripted drama, even when that emotion comes from genuinely painful places. And then there's the evolution, because this story genuinely doesn't stay in one place. Orton attended anger management classes and made efforts to change his behavior, recognizing his shortcomings and working on controlling his temper, ultimately becoming a better person in the industry. In recent years, he has been praised as a locker room leader, a shift that coincides with his maturation and WWE's evolving workplace culture following the speaking out movement. Multiple performers who came up under him in the later part of his career, including Riddle, his tag team partner during their RK Bro run, have spoken positively about working alongside him, a fundamentally different account from what the 2004 to 2012 period produced. Whether that change is genuine personal growth, the natural mellowing of someone who's gotten older and wiser, or a combination of both, it's consistently reported by people in a position to actually know. So here's the actual picture when you put all of this together. Randy Orton is a performer whose early career contained genuinely documented bad behavior, some of it serious enough that internal pressure was building to end his employment entirely, behavior that affected real people in real ways. He's also a performer who, by most accounts across the second half of his career, became a different presence in the locker room than the one those early stories describe. And he's also, simultaneously, one of the most purely gifted professional wrestlers of his entire generation, someone whose in-ring legacy would be considered elite, regardless of anything else attached to his name. Wrestling rarely produces figures simple enough to be purely celebrated or purely condemned. Orton might be the clearest proof of that on WWE's entire roster. Where do you land on the full picture? Does the documented change in his behavior over time matter to you, or does the early record define how you see the legacy? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more of these fully documented deep dives on wrestling's most complex figures, make sure you're subscribed to Wrestling Decoded. There's plenty more of this still to uncover.